Ogre is a board war game first released in 1977 as the first Metagaming Concepts Microgame, designed by Steve Jackson. It is an asymmetrical forces game, set in the late 21st century. One player has a single giant robot tank pitted against a second player's headquarters, defended by a mixture of conventional tanks, infantry, and artillery. The concept was strongly influenced by Keith Laumer's novel Bolo, and Colin Capp's short story, Gotlos. The ogre itself is named after the large and strong mythological beast Ogre. Since its initial release in 1977, Ogre has been reprinted many times, most recently in 2014. After Jackson founded his own company, Steve Jackson Games, Ogre, its sequel GEV, and further expansions were published in the pocket box format. On March 8, 2008, Steve Jackson Games announced the planned production of Ogre 6th edition. In 2012, a new version of Ogre successfully completed funding on Kickstarter.com, for release in November 2012. After multiple delays, the elaborate £29 designer's edition was shipped to all Kickstarter backers in November 2013. Game description: Ogre uses a hex map depicting barren terrain with only ridgelines and large, radioactive craters as obstacles. The defender sets up his forces in the more congested part of the map and the ogre enters the opposite side at the beginning of the game. The basic version of the game has the attacker using a single ogre heavy tank, while the advanced scenario gives the attacker the larger, more powerful, Mark V ogre tank versus an increased number of defenders. The defender is allocated a certain number of infantry and armor units, but gets to decide the exact composition of his own armored forces. The different types of units encourage a combined arms approach, with each type being better than the others in different aspects. Heavy tanks have high attack and defense with moderate speed and low range. Missile tanks have moderate attack and defense with moderate range and low speed. GEVs have very high speed, low attack, low range, and moderate defense. Howitzers have very high attack and range but are easily destroyed, are mobile, and expensive. However, according to the game's designer, this balanced mix of units was not quite right in the first edition. The second edition sped up heavy tanks, slowed down GEVs, and changed the defender's purchasing from attack factors to armor units. Critical reception. Martin Easterbrook began his 1977 review of Ogre by saying, "Be warned, this game could become a craze," adding that, "the idea of the microgames themselves is remarkable enough in itself." He rated the game 8 out of 10 but criticized the game's title and flimsy equipment, weak infantry. Reviewing the first Steve Jackson Games editions of Ogre, Tony Watson called Ogre a legend in the ranks of SF gamedom, and deservedly so. As well as being a lot of fun to play, it's an interesting extrapolation on high-tech armored warfare. It was noted that the rules had remained essentially the same in the new edition, and the most significant changes being to the physical design, with larger counters, and full-color maps by Dennis Lubit. Watson also welcomed the retention of the original artwork alongside new pieces. "No one draws a GEV or ogre like Mr. Chung." Reviewing the combined edition of 1991, Alan Varney stated, "Ogre and GEV, two simulation board games of armored combat on a future battlefield, are among the best the field has ever seen. Fast, elegant, and endlessly replayable." Whilst praising the production values of the two-color playing pieces, Varney found the box somewhat flimsy. In his 2007 essay, game designer Eric Wujcik said, "I think Ogre's success really boils down to 4 essentials. Ogre is fast, asymmetrical, open-ended, and is a teaching tool. Ogre had restructured my mind pretty completely. But it wasn't until 2002 that I realized how effective Ogre is at getting across so many important component mechanisms of play and design." Additions. The first and second editions of Ogre were released in 1977. The first edition featured artwork by Winchell Chung, while the second had a much larger print run and rulebook artwork by Clark Bradley rather than Chung. The third edition, released in 1982, introduced double-sided counters. An edition called Ogre Deluxe Edition was released in 1987. The rulebook cover artwork was the Dennis Lubert illustration that was also used for the Ogre computer game. The board was sturdier than the previous edition's paper map, and the counters were provided with stand-up plastic bases. GM Magazine's 1989 review of Ogre Deluxe Edition highlighted the game's ease of introduction and short playing time, but pointed out that most gamers either like the game or loathe it. In 1990, Ogre was combined with another game called GEV. In a Ogre GEV box, the Ogre rules were designated as 4th edition and the GEV rules were designated as 3rd edition. Ogre GEV was released into a single 5 3/8 by 8.5 box, and the rules were combined into a single 4x7 booklet. The rules were printed so that the booklet was flipped over to see the other rules. Counters were in green and white, and maps were the same as the 3rd edition maps for both Ogre and GEV, but printed in the same sheet. In 2000, Ogre GEV was released again and designated as 5th edition, with new cover art by Philip Reed, sold in a VHS box but rules still in a 4x7, 44-page booklet and counters in black, red and white. New Deluxe Ogre was a reissued version of the original Ogre, packaged with miniatures rather than counters, and the original crater map printed on a larger scale. Deluxe Ogre won the Wargamer Award for Excellence in 2001. In 2011, Steve Jackson announced a 6th edition, the Ogre Designers Edition, combining Ogre and GEV, with larger full-color flat counters for most units and constructible cardboard figures for the Ogres. Steve Jackson Games released a reprinted version of the original 1977 game in 2014. It was sold at the game's original price of $2.95. Kickstarter project. In May 2012, a new designer's edition of Ogre was funded on Kickstarter.com. The original goal was $20,000 and the final funding was a total of $923,680. As the funding grew, more and more options and upgrades were added, with the final game weighing over 25 pounds. It began shipping to its Kickstarter supporters in October 2013, and is expected to arrive at retail stores on December 6, 2013. Spin-offs. Ogre spawned a sequel, GEV, focusing on the GEV hover tank and the other conventional armor and infantry types. Other games based on Ogre include Shockwave, an expansion that introduced new unit types including cruise missiles and a map that could be used with the GEV map. Ogre Miniatures, an adaptation of the game to miniature wargaming, using 1 to 285 scale miniatures. This adaptation won the 1992 Origins Award for Best Miniatures Rules. In addition to miniatures from Steve Jackson Games, a set of Ogre miniatures was also developed by Ralph Arthur, which won the 1992 Origins Award for Best Vehicular Miniatures Series. The first set of Ogre miniatures, produced by Martian Metals under license of Metagaming Concepts in 1979, won the H.G. Wells Award for Best Vehicular Model Series of 1979. Diceland. Ogre, a paper dice game by Cheap Ass Games. Computer adaptations, including the 1986 Ogre release by Origin Systems, Inc., for Apple II, Amiga, Atari 8-bit, Atari ST, Commodore 64, DOS, and Macintosh. Books. The Ogre book was a collection of articles and rules variants from the Space Gamer. It was reissued in 2001, expanded from 40 pages to 128 with further retrospective from Steve Jackson. GURPS Ogre was a supplement for the role-playing game GURPS.